In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and deep forests, there lived a young man named David. At 25, he had grown up with a single parent, his mother, Martha. But there was always something that made him uneasy: her face, marred by burn scars that stretched from her cheekbone down to her neck. Every time he looked at her, a pang of disgust and shame twisted in his gut. Martha, despite her disfigurement, was a gentle soul. She worked 2 jobs, often late into the night, to make sure David had everything he needed. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, her son never showed her affection. He recoiled at her touch, avoided her gaze, and grew distant as the years passed. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Martha decided to tell David the truth, the story she had kept to herself for so long. She believed that perhaps, if he knew the truth, he would finally understand and maybe, just maybe, forgive her for being the way she was. "David," she began hesitantly, sitting him down at their worn kitchen table, "there's something I need to tell you." David looked up from his phone, uninterested. "What is it now, Mom?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. Martha swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "You know, my face. The burns. They happened when you were a baby." David's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "There was a fire," she said, her voice quivering with the memory. "Our house caught fire in the middle of the night. I woke up to the smell of smoke. When I reached your room, the flames were already spreading." David cut her off, his voice cold. "So what? You couldn't be careful enough. You let the house burn down." Martha flinched at his words, but she forced herself to continue. "I didn't think about the fire. I thought only of you. I ran into your room and grabbed you from your crib. The ceiling, it collapsed as I was leaving. I covered you with my body. The burns, they saved you." "David," her voice broke at the last word, and tears welled up in her eyes. She had hoped, prayed, that he would finally understand, but David just stared at her, his face expressionless. Then, he stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech. "So, what? You think that makes everything okay? You think that justifies this?" He waved a hand at her face, his voice growing louder, angrier. "Every time I look at you, all I see is a monster. Why couldn't you have saved me without ruining yourself? Without ruining my life?" Martha's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had never felt such pain, not even during the fire. "David," she whispered, "I am sorry. I just wanted you to be safe." "Safe?" David laughed bitterly. "Well, thanks for nothing. I'm done with you, Mom. I'm done pretending everything's okay. From now on, don't expect anything from me. I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back." With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Martha sat there, frozen, the tears streaming down her face. She had lost him. The son she had sacrificed everything for was gone. Days turned into weeks, and David didn't return. Martha went about her days like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. The neighbors whispered about her, pitying the poor woman whose son had abandoned her. But Martha said nothing, her heart too broken to care. One day, David was at a bar with some friends, laughing and drinking, trying to drown out the guilt gnawing at his insides. He was telling a crude joke about his mother, making fun of her scars, when a stranger at the next table turned to him. "Hey, kid," the stranger said, his voice rough but steady, "you talk a lot for someone who doesn't know what he's saying." David scoffed. "What's it to you, old man?" The stranger looked at him with hard, steely eyes. "I've seen men die in wars, seen mothers lose their children. If your mother's still alive and you're mocking her, then you're the biggest fool I've ever met." David's laughter died in his throat, but he quickly shook it off. "Whatever. You don't know anything about me." The stranger leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost menacing tone. "I know this: if you walk away from your mother, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, Maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And that regret will eat you alive. David's face paled, but he refused to show any fear. He left the bar that night, the stranger's words echoing in his mind. He tried to shake them off, but they clung to him like a shadow. Weeks passed, and David continued to avoid his mother. But her absence grew heavier, the silence in his life more unbearable. One day, out of the blue, he decided to return home, not to apologize, but to collect some of his things. He didn't intend to stay. When he arrived at the old house, it was eerily quiet. He walked through the door and called out, "Mom!" There was no answer. He searched the house, and finally, he found her in her bedroom, lying peacefully on her bed. She was holding a small, charred photograph of the two of them, taken before the fire. The smile on her face was serene, but David's heart skipped a beat when he realized she wasn't breathing. Panic surged through him as he shook her, calling her name, but there was no response. The reality of her death crashed down on him like a wave, and for the first time in his life, David wept. He cried for his mother, for the sacrifices she made, for the love he had thrown away. The guilt consumed him, and the stranger's words rang in his ears. In the days that followed, David arranged for a small funeral. No one came except for a few neighbors and the local pastor. He stood alone at a grave, the pain in his chest unbearable. As he turned to leave, he tripped over something in the grass. Looking down, he saw a small, half-burnt doll, his childhood toy, the one his mother had saved from the fire. He picked it up, staring at it in disbelief. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, turning into a sob. David sank to the ground, clutching the doll to his chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered through his tears. "I'm so sorry." From then on, David lived with the ghost of his mother haunting his every step. He tried to move on, but the weight of his regret was too heavy. The tragicomic twist of fate that had spared his life at the cost of his mother's face now cursed him. With a life of unending sorrow, and so, the young man who had once scorned his mother's sacrifice found himself trapped in a prison of his own making, the ashes of his regret burning brighter with each passing day.